Finding the right contractors is one of the things that looks straightforward from the outside until you're actually in it. By the time most builders realize they have a contractor problem, they're already mid-project, over budget, and staring at a schedule that just doesn't make sense anymore. So I want to talk about how to actually build a contractor base, not just how to find warm bodies, but how to find people you can work with consistently, project after project, and why that distinction matters more than builders expect. So here's what I'm gonna walk through. First, I wanna explain what the contractor relationship actually looks like in residential construction, because a lot of people misunderstand it going in. Then I'll get into where the real breakdowns happen and why the typical ways people try to solve a problem usually don't work. After that, I'll walk through how we actually approach finding and vetting contractors, what I look for before I commit to someone, and how I think about building relationships over time. And at the end, I'll talk about what separates builders who always seem to have good subs from ones who are constantly scrambling, because it's usually not what people think. Let me start with something that took me a while to fully appreciate. As a home builder, you don't employ contractors. You're not their boss in the traditional sense, you're their customer. And in a healthy market, you're competing for their time and attention like everyone else. That dynamic shifts a lot of how you need to think about it. The best tradespeople, your framers, plumbers, the electricians, who are actually good and reliable, they have options. They're not sitting around waiting for the phone to ring. If anything, they're turning work away. So the question is not how I find the contractors, it's how do I become the kind of builder that good contractors want to work for? Those are two very different questions, and most people only think about the first. Now, when you're building in that luxury segment, that dynamic gets compressed even further. And this is something I don't hear talked about enough. The pool of contractors who can actually perform at the level a luxury home demands is much smaller than people assume. We're not talking about someone who can just frame a wall or rough in plumbing. We're talking about craftsmen who understand the tolerances, materials, finishes, and the expectations that come with a home at that price point. A client spending $1.5 million is gonna notice things that you would never notice in a production build. They're gonna notice if the trim work isn't tight. They're gonna notice if the tile transitions aren't clean. They're gonna notice if the paint has roller marks in it. And when those things happen, that's not just a punch list item, that's a conversation that actually impacts your reputation and relationship with that client. So the margin for error here is small, and that means that the standard for who you bring has to be higher. What that means practically is that you can't treat luxury contract sourcing the same way you approach it on a production basis. Volume builders can absorb more variation because the specs are tighter and the scope is much more repetitive. In custom and luxury construction, every home is different. The scope changes, the material changes, the design detail changes, and your contractors have to be able to adapt to that without losing quality and execution. That is a rare skill set, and it commands a premium, both in price and how you manage a relationship. If you're gonna go into a luxury build trying to win on the lowest bid, you are going to lose on quality, and that cost is gonna show up. It always does. The framing layer matters because it changes your posture going into every conversation. If you walk into this thinking your job is to find whoever will take your money, you're gonna end up with whoever's available, which often means whoever's available is available for a reason. But if you walk in understanding that you're trying to build a working relationship with someone that has leverage and options, you're gonna show up differently. You're gonna be clear about what you're offering, you're gonna ask better questions, and you're gonna pay more attention to the signals they give you early on. Now, here's where most builders get into trouble. They treat contractor sourcing as a one-time problem to solve at the beginning of a project and then forget about it. They need a framer, so they ask around. They get a few names, they call one, and they talk 15 minutes and then make a decision. That process might work once and you might get lucky, but it doesn't scale and it doesn't protect you because the whole thing falls apart the moment that one person gets busy or moves on or doesn't show up. And in construction, that happens a lot more than you think. So the builders who are constantly scrambling are usually the ones who've never built anything beyond a single point dependency on whoever happened to be available at that time. The other pattern I see people going to is straight to internet platforms, directories, apps. They're trying to shortcut the sourcing process entirely. And I'm not saying these tools are useless, but there's certainly a gap between a contractor who's signed up for a platform online and a contractor who has real trust with someone that is a referral. References from the internet are easy to curate. References from other builders who've been on that end of somebody's work, that's a different kind of signal. And at the luxury level, that gap is even wider. You're not gonna find your best trim carpenter on a lead generation app. You're gonna find them because another builder you respect told you about them, or because a supplier pointed you in the right direction, or because you saw their work somewhere and you intentionally tracked them down. So here's how I actually think about building a contractor base. The most reliable starting point is other builders. You don't need to think about competitors in a hostile sense, but people who are operating in the same market you are and who've already done the work of vetting people. Most of them will talk with you, and if they don't, they're not worth your time. If you're just getting started, the conversations might feel really awkward to initiate, but you're gonna find that most of them are willing to talk and give you recommendations, especially if you're not trying to directly compete against them with the conversation. So go to your local home builders association, show up to events, meetings. Get in rooms where other builders are. And when you're there, ask direct questions. Who do you use for framing? Have you had any good experience with mechanical subs lately? Who do you avoid? That last question often tells you more than the first two. Your suppliers are another underused source. Your lumberyard, your window company, your roofing supplier, these people see contractors every single day. They know who pays their bills on time, who've been around, who communicates well, and who started cutting corners. They have no reason to steer you wrong, and they often have more current information than anyone else in the market. They're doing 100 times the volume you are. If you're working with high-end suppliers, the ones who are selling specialty windows, custom millwork, high-end stone and tile, those reps know exactly what contractors have the experience to handle what they sell. So build those relationships and ask questions directly. They want to help you because they also want your business. Once you have those names, that vetting process, it really matters. I'm not talking about background checks and licenses, while those can be based on requirements. I mean actually talking to the person in a way that tells you something about how they operate. I want to know how they think about scheduling, communication, what their job expectations are, make sure that your expectations align with theirs. I want to know what they do when something goes wrong, because something always goes wrong in construction. I always say, you're using real materials and real people. Something happens. So I want to know what their typical crew looks like, whether it's actually their crew or whether they're subbing it out to somebody else. And I want to see if I can walk their work in person or the materials in person. And I want to talk to at least 1 or 2 references, specifically builders that they have worked with who are working in the same range that you are in. In that luxury work specifically, I want to know whether they've actually worked there before. That's why it's so important to understand who they've worked with and where they've worked before. Someone can be a perfectly competent plumber on a standard production home and be completely unprepared for the complexity of a high-end custom build. Heated floors, custom fixtures, not trusses, things that require coordination with designers and architects and multiple other trades all at once. I'm not saying that they can't learn, and I'm not saying they can't do it, but I'm gonna say that you should probably use somebody who's already invested themselves significantly into that learning curve. So work history at a comparable scope and quality level matters, and it's worth asking about directly. The first project you do with someone new is always a test, and you should treat it that way as well. Start with a scope that's meaningful, but maybe not your most critical path. Set high standards immediately, because once you set them, if you set them too low, that's what they remember and that's what they're gonna do. And pay attention to how they communicate when there's an issue. Pay attention to whether they're on schedule. Pay attention to whether the quality holds up across the whole job or just the visible parts. That first project tells you almost everything you need to know about whether it's someone you want to build a long-term relationship with. And that's the goal. Long-term relationships are the best ones to have, because that relationship is what actually solves the problem over the long term. Builders who always seem to have good contractors aren't just better at finding them. They're not just cycling them through. They're better at keeping them. They pay on time, super critical and easy, but apparently hard to do for some people. And don't make them chase you. Communicate clearly up front so there are fewer misunderstandings on the back end. They treat their contractors with respect on the job site. They give feedback when something isn't right, but they do it in a way that doesn't make people feel like they're being nickel and dimed or disrespected and talked down to. Good tradesmen, they talk to each other. They share who's good to work with and who isn't. Your reputation as a builder affects your access to contractors just as much as their reputation affects your willingness to hire them. And in a market where the best luxury tradespeople already have more work than they can take, your reputation is genuinely one of the most valuable things that you can build. Now, I want to say something about market conditions because they actually do matter. In a tight labor market, everything I've described gets harder. Contractors are busier, less responsive, more selective. Their price goes up and their availability goes down. Builders who weather that are the ones who have built the best relationships before the market got tight, who had people they could call because they've been working with them already for multiple years and on multiple projects. So if you're reading this in a slower period, that's actually an opportunity. That's when contractors are more open to new relationships. That's when you do the work of building the bench so you're not starting from scratch when demand picks up. The fundamentals here don't change regardless of what business you're in. You need to be in rooms where contractors and builders talk to each other. You need to ask direct questions so that you get real information. You need to vet people properly before you depend on them. And at the luxury level, that bar is just higher. You need to build a bench of relationships so you're not one phone call away from a scheduling problem. That's why we always say you need to have more than one trade at every single level. And you need to be the kind of operator that good tradespeople want to come back to, because ultimately that's what gives you access over time that other people simply don't have. This is one of those parts of the business that's easy to underestimate early on, and it's hard to recover from if you get it wrong. It's also one of those things where if you do the work up front, it compounds in your favor for a long time. The contractors who show up for your project after project, who prioritize your jobs, who tell you when something isn't right before it becomes a problem, that network is worth more than almost any other asset in your business. So if this was helpful, I'd appreciate a like and a subscribe. If you're thinking about something specific regarding your contractor base or your relationships, drop it in the comments. I'll do my best to get back to you.